Hi, I'm Christina O'Malley, and this is Better Science Teaching. So, what I want to talk to you today is a little bit about some of the rules and the procedures and the guidelines that go along with participating in a science fair that is affiliated with the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair. This is a series of science fairs that's um, coordinated is the right word, coordinated by the Society for Science and the Public, as they've done for many, 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 many years. And over time, they have developed a set of guidelines and ethical principles that should guide student research to help make sure that what we're doing is safe and legal and scientific, has some scientific merit to it. Generally, these rules are going to apply to students who are working in 9th through 12th grade, and these are international rules, so they apply anywhere in the world where you're participating in an affiliated fair. I work, in addition to being a teacher and working with some students, mentoring some students who are not students at my school. I also volunteer as a member of the scientific review committee, and in addition to working with some students in my school building and students that I mentor who aren't in my school building, I also volunteer as a member of local scientific review committees where we help students make sure that they are following rules properly. And as part of that role, I'm also happy to help teachers. So if you have questions and you think I can help you, feel free to shoot me an email or leave a message in the comments. And if I can't answer your question, then I can hook you up with somebody who can. So what I want to do today is talk about just the forms that are required for every student 9th through 12th grade who's entering a fair. And some fairs may actually require students who are in junior high to do this as well. But generally, they're not eligible for ISEF. And so it's good for them to do so that they're aware of it, so that once they become high school students, they know. But some fairs don't explicitly require that. Okay, so the first one that I want to talk about here, if I can grab my box and move it. Okay, move my box there. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is this one that's called the checklist for adult sponsor. So the 4 things that are required for every student are forms 1A, the research plan, and 1B. So this first one is a checklist for an adult sponsor. If you've watched my video about the people who are involved in a science fair project, your adult sponsor is the person who's kind of like, I don't know, I think of them as like your rules enabler. But they're the person, an adult, they have to be an adult, who is walking through all this paperwork and these forms with a student. So when you fill this form out and you're listed as someone's adult sponsor, you are making a statement that you are aware of the rules and guidelines of science fair. As a person who sits on the scientific review committee chair, it kind of gets under my skin a little when people say, well, I'm the adult sponsor, but I didn't read the rules and guidelines. It's literally the first box that you check. So this form is pretty straightforward. What this is an acknowledgement that the adult and the student are aware of the ethical rules and guidelines of science fair, and you've completed this. So when I do forms with my students, I have them go through the forms wizard, which I will link to below for you. And that will identify for them which forms they need to fill out. I frequently, especially for students who have more complicated projects, ones with humans, ones with microbes, ones with animals, we go back and forth a little bit about which forms are actually required. These 4 are required for everybody. I'm just gonna walk through this with you guys. So student name, have the student write their name there. I tell them to do this in ink with one exception, and that's the project title. Sometimes I will have them put a working title there, and we'll go back and change it because sometimes the project that they ultimately end up doing requires a different title than what they started with. For my students, I actually have them write the title last. So you'll notice if you follow my videos that a lot of these are kind of stepwise working through a science project. Title is the last one, so it being literally the second thing on the first form is kind of, it's there. It has to be there, obviously. But for me, the project title is not a critical thing. We come back to it. It's really just to identify which project we're looking at. The first checkbox, I've read the rules and guidelines. The second one, the second checkbox is I've reviewed the student's completed checklist 1A and research plan project summary. So basically, you're just acknowledging here that you are aware of what the student is doing. I've worked with them and discussed possible risks. Risk is very important. We need to make sure that students are doing things safely. The next two questions are just there to identify if you are aware that they're using something that may require extra forms or permissions. Humans, vertebrate animals, microorganisms, rDNA, tissues. Items that have to be completed for all projects are listed there. That's just check boxes for you to acknowledge that they're included in your forms packet. The ones that are tabbed over, the regulated research institutional industrial setting form, which is Form 1C, and the continuation research progression form. Those are both important. The first one is because that lets us know if your student is working at a university or an outside lab, that changes the way that they get permission to do things. It changes the way that they may be seeking an IRB approval. The continuation research progression form is because there are timelines, there are deadlines for when the student can start and finish an ISEF affiliated project. And so those forms need to be included. And if you are continuing your research from a prior year, you have to demonstrate that the new research is substantially different than prior research. You may also need other forms. So this is just a checklist of what forms are required. This is a good thing to walk through with students before they submit their forms, because then they know what needs to be in their package. For my students in my class, I have them doing these in November, so it's well ahead of the February submission deadlines for a lot of registrations for science fiction. There's a place there for adult sponsor to put their name, what day they reviewed it, phone and email. I actually have students fill in a lot of these things. Obviously, they don't fill in my signature, but I'll come through and sign it and do data review. And students fill this out for themselves. Then I just have to review it. It saves me time. When you're working with 20 to 30 students, it's difficult to find class time to go through forms individually with every student. The next one is a student checklist. This is contact information. This is the one that when we're going through registrations at the science fair, if we need to reach out to a teacher or a student's parent, this is how we get their contact information. So please make sure that you're putting something there that you actually use. All right, so up at the top, basic information, student grade, email, phone. For our students, they can't put their school email because they can't receive email from outside of the school. So they need something where people can actually communicate with them. If they have other team members, you're allowed to have up to 3. Generally, we don't do that at our building. There's another title of my project line. That's another one. I'll let them write it in pencil. I'll tell them to write a working title. Don't let your students get too hung up on this. Just make sure that they have it before you register for your fair. School fund, address, the adult sponsor's name, again. Does this require approval? Yes or no? Is this a continuation? Yes or no? If it is a continuation, attach stuff from the previous year. This is pretty standard. So some forms packets get quite large. It's data collection. If I'm doing their, if this is filled in on a date before I've gone through the forms, I tell them that they can't use that data. Their project has to be approved before they can start doing data collection. So a lot of the time I'll fill in that date with whatever date I'm filling out their forms and doing signatures. Source of data, this is all just check boxes. Name and address of work sites that aren't at your house and aren't at your school. So if you were doing work at a university or a research lab, or if you're using a field site, include the field site there as best as you can. I know some field sites won't have an address. But this is just another way for your scientific review committee to make sure that everything is being done correctly and according to local rules and following ethical guidelines. Keep in mind down here at the bottom, it reminds you need a research plan or a project summary and an abstract. And that's something that you're going to not be able to have when you're seeking your approval, obviously, because you haven't done your science fair project. But that's something that will be attached to your forms later. The next page is the research plan, project summary instructions. The most common mistake that I see with this is people look at this and they think that it is a form and they stick it in their forms and they call it a day. This is not a form. These are instructions. So what they are telling you to do is to write up your research plan. Now, for my students, this is what becomes the backbone of their experimental design section of their research paper, which is required at many fairs, at least. All of our fairs require them that we participate in. But this is the thing that forms the backbone of this. I tell students we're not pulling all-nighters the weekend of science fair. We're doing everything a step at a time so that we can get through it, and we assemble things at the end. So at this point in the year, they've already completed their introduction. They've done a literature search. They've developed a question, and this is where they're going to start setting up, okay, how am I going to actually answer this question? This is a really good walkthrough of what needs to be included. Make sure my picture's come here, buddy. Nope. Okay. So this lays out very clearly what should be there. This is the most common thing for me to have to write out to a teacher and say, hey, we received your student's application to register for the fair, but they didn't include a research plan. They have to bring it with them the day of the fair. Because there's more problems than that. Because if this isn't attached, like, how can we really be assured that they had prior approval if there was no indication that their research plan was written before experimentation? But anyway, we try to give students the benefit of the doubt as best that we can, because generally students aren't doing harmful things. And if they can provide a research plan and their teacher says, yeah, I know what they were doing, we'll stick it in their forms. So anyway, so you have to make sure that you writ this out ahead of time. And this little blurb up at the top says, if you have to make changes during your research, which is a thing that happens in science, then just make sure that you include an addendum. And for my students, if they need to include an addendum, I tell them to bring it to me and I'll sign it. I'll initial it so that people know that I had seen it. And then at the end, if any changes were made, then a summary is required. Again, that seems pretty standard and pretty flexible for science. One thing to note is that if your addendums or your change to your research plan would require something that needs to be approved, then you need to make sure that you seek that approval. And that includes things like if you're making changes to things that you're doing with organisms or humans or microbes, if you're changing something about that fundamentally, then you have to get it reapproved. If you are making a change, if you're doing a project with humans that involves a survey or an assessment, that's something that would need to be reapproved, right? It seems like it could be construed as unethical if you set up your experiment, you have a survey that's approved by your institutional review board, and then you decide you're going to make changes to the assessment. Like, yeah, you're going to need to get that approved, especially if it's substantial, or if it's related to the way that you are going to handle or use data. Some of these, if you're doing an engineering design project where you're saying, like, well, my problem is that I need an object that does X, Y, and Z, you're going to be able to set up a plan. You're going to be able to put out a list of goals and targets for those goals, but you may not be able to say exactly how you're going to do those things, because that stuff is going to come up during your experimentation. This is a perfect kind of project for you to produce an addendum and just make sure that you're keeping track of if it needs to be reapproved or not for safety. Okay, so it includes a list of, it includes at the top, the research plan project summary should include the following. Firstly, your rationale, just your purpose. Why are you doing this research? What do you think the impact of your research will have on society? For part B, your research questions, your hypotheses, your engineering goals, and expected outcomes. I think about these things as pairs. If you were doing a scientific method project, you're going to have a research question and hypotheses. If you're doing engineering design, you're going to have engineering goals and expected outcomes. You're probably not going to have all four. Next section is procedures. Describe all the procedures in your experimental design, including how you're going to collect data and where data is coming from. Describe only your project. Okay, what they're saying here is don't include things from other literature or a prior year's a prior year's project. Just include this year's project, the stuff that you are going to do. For my students, part of their literature search is identifying procedures of similar things so that they can apply it to their work. So here is where they're going to start setting up what it is exactly they're going to do, what are their variables, what are they going to measure, how are they going to measure it. All of those things should be included in your procedures. I would say things to not include in your procedures are things like that materials list that always shows up in science fair projects. That's things like materials, and then it says pencil. Like, no, if it's something that everybody has in their house, you can assume that they have a pencil and paper. Anyway, if it's special, or if it's something that's actually required for your project, like if you're building a bridge out of pencils, yeah, include pencils. But like if you're just talking about office supplies, you don't need to include those. Risk and safety. So there should be a section in your research plan about what potential risks and safety precautions you need. It's okay to go a little bit overboard on those, so that a person reviewing this would kind of roll their eyes and be like, yeah, you don't really need to worry about that. But include things. Don't say like, it's no big deal if somebody does this, because there are some things in science fair that are a big deal. You have to be in a certain level of lab if you want to test microbes and fungi. And so if you're raising things in a petri dish, which I strongly discourage students from doing at their homes, because it's very difficult to safely dispose of those things and relatively easy to have a chance of growing something that you really don't want in your home. But you shouldn't be opening petri dishes. Most students don't have access to a lab where opening a petri dish is okay. So, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to those risks and safety precautions. Data analysis, please describe what you're going to do to analyze the data. I'm going to make a graph and look for differences. I'm going to do statistics. I'm going to look at the averages. Tell me what you're planning to do with your statistics. I've had several students in the past who their statistics makes their project. And so their ability to identify that they have statistics that needs to be done, and then to carry them out and talk about them confidently and competently is what really stands out to judges. And so this is going to be your first clue to, is this a student whose project should probably gear towards statistics a little bit more. The other good thing about that being included here in your research plan before any work is carried out is that if you need to adjust what your data collection method is or how many samples you have to accommodate the data and make the data analysis relevant, this is a good place to take care of that. Bibliography, this is where you're going to include your major references. Students in my class have already done a literature review. They already know what these references are. So that's one major reason for doing that introduction and literature review early, because it helps when you get to the research plan, because you've already done part of it. Below on this research plan form, there are some extra considerations for students and for projects that may involve things that that just have more risk or that require more forward thinking. One is if you're using human participants, you need to describe as best as you can the participants that you're using. If you're using random people, say you're using random people. If you are taking your survey to Thanksgiving and there's going to be 30 people there, maybe not this year because of coronavirus, but if you're just sampling your family, you need to know that because it reduces your variability dramatically. You need to do as best as you can, identify what your target group is for participating in human research. When I've done human research, it's with students, so my description here would be age, could be either gender, but it's going to be students at my building, so I can go and actually pull those demographics from data folks. I could say teenagers are doing whatever educational task I had them doing. If students are using their peers, they can do a similar thing. They say I'm using male and female students who are the ages of 15 to 18 generally, who are minors. So just the best you can. there's some descriptions here for some protected groups. Minors need their parents to sign a signature for them. Pregnant women, special consideration. People who may not be able to sign be able to understand the risks involved. Those are listed here too. Recruitment, where are you going to find them? I found them at Thanksgiving. Okay. I went to the mall. Okay. I found these kids at school. Okay. You describe through here too all of the things that are related to what you're going to have humans doing and if there are any risks to them. This is all something that also is going to be used for another form to send to your IRB, which I'll talk about in a different video. You also need to include an informed consent process. There's a form for that. There's a form for everything in science fair. There's a form for informed consent. Generally, that's not something you're going to have to hand over to your SRC. So if you collect data that's protected on those, you won't have to turn that over. Vertebrate animal research. So if you're using an animal that has a backbone, this is stuff, and tunicates are vertebrates. This is something that you're going to need to consider. Do you have to use a vertebrate? You know, sometimes you can't get around that if your entire project is to like study your pet dog. You know, you can't use a different animal. This doesn't make sense. But sometimes it makes sense to use a vertebrate animal. My recommendation would always have a veterinarian on your as your qualified scientist or your adult sponsor, so that you have somebody that's knowledgeable that's working on that with you as you develop your project. Again, just describe everything that you can about it. This list is pretty good. Are you using potentially hazardous biological agents? These are also called PHBAs. What are your organisms? What is your BSL level? That's the level of your biological safety level of your lab. So what equipment does your lab have to make sure that you're not going to contaminate yourself or other people? What safety precautions are you using? And then hazardous chemicals, activities, and devices. You know, lots of things can be considered hazardous chemicals. You know, there's at least at one point in time, you know, I just even assume that water is a hazardous chemical. Yeah. You know, and you just have to be careful with everything. If you are questioning whether or not you need a form, do the form. Sometimes the risk assessment form is like, yeah, I am using this chemical. This is a chemical people can eat, so I don't think that it's dangerous. I don't see any risks. If somebody has a problem with it, I anticipate that it would be this, and this is how you would fix it. Like the forms are not, they're not going to limit you. They're just going to make sure that you demonstrate that you have considered the rules and you follow the guidelines. Okay. Lastly, approval form. So this is one. The most common error on this one with students is they forget to sign it themselves. So this is an acknowledgement by the student and parent. So the adult sponsor is not always the student's parent. Sometimes it's someone else. So frequently for my students, I'm the adult sponsor and their parent signs this form. Sometimes their parents are professional scientists and engineers, and they want to be more involved, and that's fine too. So this acknowledges they understand risks and dangers of the research plan. It also acknowledges that they've read the rules and guidelines. So again, if you're going to make an argument, if you've entered a fair where you have to submit these forms and then you try to make an argument to me that you didn't read them, I'm going to pull up your 1B and say, hey, you completed this form that says that you read these rules. And it says that you're going to abide by science fair ethics statement, which everybody should be okay with. And there's a place here for a parent or guardian's signature. After that, you don't fill out anything at the bottom here. The stuff at the bottom is all that all gets filled out at the fair. This first one is a signature for projects that need prior approval. So this is for if you need approval before experimentation. The SRC IRB chair can write their name here and fill this out. Generally, there's a whole nother form for the IRB anyway, but your chair can fill this out. This cannot be filled out by someone who's related, who's working with the student. So it can't be the adult sponsor, it can't be their teacher, and it can't be their parent. It has to be an SRC or an IRB, which is a group of people who are reviewing this project. Those folks cannot sign these. And so even with my students, even though I'm on the SRC and I serve as the SRC chair in the past few years, my students don't have my signature there because somebody else has to approve it. It would be a conflict of interest for me to review their project. And so these actually go to another member of our SRC when they're from my school so that I don't sign them. Like I don't even sign other students at my school who are not my students. Part B here is projects that are conducted at a regulated research institution are approved by the proper board before experimentation, and they comply with ISEF rules. So like, I would never sign this one. This is for, wait, no. I would sign this one. I could sign it if 1C is attached. So prior approval goes in A. If it doesn't have prior SRC or IRB approval and it's conducted at a research institution, I can put a signature there. This is the one that I normally sign when students apply for our science fair, where I will fill in the regional SRC chair name. So I will sign this if their project appears to have a research plan and comply with all the rules, which means that they have all the forms and they have all the appropriate forms. Okay, so I hope that walkthrough of the forms was helpful. And remember, these are the minimum forms that are required. So depending on what your project is, you may need extra forms. And I'm going to walk through some of those other ones in a different video. But these are the basic ones. If you have any questions, you think I might be able to help you out, let me know below. I'm always looking for things that are helpful and timely for viewers to be able to see things. Feel free to share this with your students if you think it might help. I hope that you stay safe, that you be well, and you have a great day. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.